Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to Berkeley College virtual events. I'm Angela Harrington. Today's program features Carrie Chernis and Cornelia Roach, the authors of Leading with Feeling, 9 Strategies for Emotionally Intelligent Leadership. This event is being brought to you in partnership with the Berkeley College International Studies Program and Manhattan Chamber of Commerce. We welcome our students from abroad, including our partners from Fresenius University in Germany and our students from China. We welcome our students, faculty, staff, and guests. A special thanks to Manny and Nori Jafer with the International Program for inspiring this event, and to our speakers, Carrie Chernis and Cornelia Roach, for showing us how to lead with feeling. At this time, I would like to introduce our president, Michael Smith. Since becoming president of Berkeley College in 2015, Michael not only leads with feeling, but he leads by example. His highly personal style of leadership has made Michael a recognizable leader in higher education, especially in the New York metropolitan area, because he puts students first. I couldn't think of a better way to introduce this event and to start the morning on a Friday than with Michael Smith. Michael, take it away.
Thank you, Angela, and good morning, everyone. There's a modern business day philosopher by the name of Jim Rohn who had a very, very simple philosophy. He said he had the ability to predict someone's future by the answer of 2 questions. One is, who are you spending your time with? Who are the 5 people you're spending most of your time with? Now, over the last 9 months, due to governmental regulations and requirements, who we're spending our time with is maybe dramatically altered from what we've done prior in our lives. The other question he asked was, what are the books that you've read and what are the books that you're reading now? And when you look at what higher education is all about, higher education is about taking data and transforming it into information and building it and transferring it to knowledge, where it eventually becomes wisdom in the eyes of the ultimate receivers for application. That's really higher education in a nutshell. Aside from all the other complicated organizational charts that we have out there, but we're going to talk about folks and individuals who have taken that data and transferred it into information and collapsed it. Books are probably one of the most wonderful ways to really learn, because you're getting the assembled hard work of individuals captured and boiled down to very essential wisdom. And that's what our discussion today is going to be about in our presentation. I do want to recognize our Berkeley College International Department that for well over 25 years has been bringing college students from all over the world, from every portion of the world into Berkeley College, and marrying the New York City skyline with the New York City experience, and providing the wisdom and knowledge, whether they stay here in the States or go back to their home countries, with the type of presentations that you're seeing today. So a lot of this work that you're going to hear about over the next hour is rooted in emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, I've spoken, a number of folks I talked to over the week when I was talking about this event or promoting it on various social media channels. Really, their ears perked up. They all have an understanding in one form or another. And when you start looking at what emotional intelligence is, it really dates back. The earliest known introduction of it was back in 1964, but received a lot of prominence in 1995, where the Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence really caught the mainstream intelligence, and you're going to see the relationship between our speakers and Daniel Goleman in that regard. But in the same breath, it was a focus of a lot of research, and they have done their research to present their findings, their books, their insights. So much of what we're doing is our lives are based and centered around communications. And it's been said that only 10% of how of what you communicate is really through verbal. That means that 90% of how you are communicating really come through the nonverbal aspects. Now, what are the nonverbal aspects? Well, they're your gestures, your tone, they're your body language, even the clothes that you wear. The New York Times this week had a business section had an article about, particularly as it related to women and women's clothing, and how designers and how companies have to change. Whereas structured clothing in business, whether it's men or women, are typically tighter, more form-fitting. When you're working from home, it's a lot more casual. We're seeing typically from the shoulders up. You're not necessarily wearing heels at your computer. You're probably wearing flats or slippers or even sandals. What goes on. So much has changed in that response. And how do you respond? How does emotional intelligence translate in those kind of areas? And can someone who just be effective from just that 10% of verbal communications that's out there? I want to recognize also today the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce and their excellent leader, Jessica Walker, who's been such a good friend to Berkeley College for so many years. We appreciate their promotion of this event today. The authors are going to talk about the 90% and really focus on the feelings portions that's out there. And feelings in the workplace is a very, very interesting subject. The question is, what is the appropriate amount to display? And basically, how do you interpret those displays in the workplace? They're going to give, the authors will talk about how that means. Those of you who are old enough to remember the movie In a League of Their Own, the Tom Hanks character says there's no crying in baseball, and basically it's baseball is in some ways analogous to business. I mean, what emotions are appropriate to show, and what do they mean, and how does that really work? As professionals, we all want to be better decision makers, and the book here is going to, and I know if you can read backwards, it's great. If you were to buy the book, or when you buy the book, rest assured the words are not backwards in the book. But it's going to talk about strategies and really practical things that you can do as a leader, and in integrating emotional intelligence and basically what feelings are and how to do it. Our authors have done a lot of research. They've collapsed the data into information and gone down to that path where they've created wisdom that they're looking to share with us today. And our authors are very distinguished. Dr. Carrie Chernis is an emeritus professor of applied psychology at Rutgers University, our state university here in New Jersey, and he's also the co-chair of the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence Organizations. And he's focused on his career and his research throughout the country, in various different places that he's lived and worked and shared his professional experiences on emotional intelligence and also on work stress and burnout, which I'm sure very few of you have any familiarity with whatsoever at this point. He has been involved with the production of over 60 scholarly articles, has written 8 books, including a book with Daniel Goleman, who he co-partners with in the consortium. He has consulted and provided his shared expertise with such blue chip companies as American Express, Johnson & Johnson, and AT&T. And his co-author on this book, Leading with Feeling, is Cornelia Roach. Dr. Roach has her doctorate in organizational psychology, also from Rutgers University. She consults with schools and not-for-profits and draws upon her experience working in a Fortune 500 company. She, does the research. She walks the talk. It's going to be a great opportunity for us to really listen to 2 distinguished scholars who have taken their scholarly work and really applied it and boiled it down to practical applications for all of us to become better decision makers and better communicators in the workplace. So it is my absolute great pleasure to introduce starting with Dr. Carrie Chernis today. Dr. Chernis.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate that introduction, and just want to reassure people that I am not wearing shorts. I'm not wearing sandals, so I'm all dressed properly and ready to go. I want to turn it over now to my co-author, Cornelia Roach, who will tell us a little bit more about the background of what we're going to be talking about today. Cornelia?
Yeah, hi. So I thought it would be interesting, at least particularly for the students, because I was a student in terms of how we came together. So when I was starting my doctoral program at Rutgers, I became involved as a research assistant when you were just establishing the consortium. So Dan Goleman had come out with his book, and then the next move was to look at it in the work settings. So anyway, I think I was in my second or third year. You and I worked together, and then I went and had a baby. So, but I always kept in touch, or would read articles that Carrie, in the consortium would publish. And, I graduated, and years out, I consulted to different kinds of organizations. And at one point, I said, you know what, I really miss my research. I miss doing research. And so I contacted Carrie through email, and he invited me to help him with the research, which now forms the basis of this book. So I was actively interviewing the subjects of the book, helping Carrie do the data analysis. But I'm happy that this thread of my life has continued, and hopefully we get to share some of the things we learned when we boil down the research. So my advice to the students out there is don't ever be shy about contacting a teacher, a mentor, or a professor if you ever find yourself at a crossroads, because it could be just kind of what the doctor ordered. So anyway, just thought we'd give a little background on how the two of us came to work together. So,
Okay, great. Cornelia, can you share your screen with the group so we can start our presentation?
So let's get started. They say, I heard this thing, I was on a Zoom call, that anyone between the ages of 20 and 30 hold their breath when anyone over the age of 48 tries to share their screen. But I did it here. So
Yeah.
There you
so
go.
You want to skip ahead to slide number 3, I think.
There we go. Okay.
Okay, good. We're all set. So what I want to do is start off by just clarifying what we mean by emotional intelligence. And then Cornelia, oops,
sorry. I hit something. Sorry. I'm good.
Okay. And then Cornelia will really kind of bring it to life with an example. So emotional intelligence is the ability to accurately perceive, understand, and manage one's emotions and those of others. Perceive, understand, and manage one's emotions and those of others. So Cornelia, can you give us an example of that?
Sure. Well, I think both Carrie and I agree. One of the, I think the richest examples that kind of incorporated all of those aspects of emotional intelligence was a story about a general manager named Tom. And Tom was a young, newly promoted, he was an engineer. He was promoted for a major steel company as a general manager. And so this was, he was a young guy with technical background, but probably not a lot of management experience going in. But he, in any case, they were to meet one of their, the automobile company was one of their major customers. And they were having an annual performance review of all their suppliers. So Tom, assembles his team of senior managers and goes to this meeting and finds out, as they sit down, he doesn't really have any expectations, thinks it's a, just a kind of a typical meeting. And the supplier goes on to list almost everything that's wrong with them as a supplier of steel. We're talking bad quality, not on time deliveries, all these indicators Tom's company was performing last in. So Tom says it was, and I'll use a little bit of swear words here, it was a holy shit moment. It was a moment that, he didn't expect, number one. And number two, I mean, imagine your major customer telling you this as a supplier. It must have been, I can just imagine the kind of fear. And he talked about the fear and and some of the anger that kind of started to boil up when he heard this news. Like, what had he gotten himself into? So he listened to his customer, and at some point he managed his emotions, right? He sat there, he asked questions, he tried to get a better understanding, and at the end of the meeting, he stood up and said, you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if you're going to fire us. I think I would too, if I were in your shoes. But if you give us another opportunity, we're going to come back and we're going to be one of your top suppliers. So he left the meeting. His team was quite dejected. He could tell that they almost seemed beaten up, depressed. And so the next day he called a meeting, and he said, he had to resist the urge. He said, there was an urge. Maybe I should just clean house. Maybe I should resign. Like, he had all these internal feelings. But he said, you know what? Usually if you react on those things, it doesn't really get you very far. So the next day he had a meeting, and he let his team vent. He tried to understand from their perspective what had been going on. And there were lots of difficult processes that they were highlighting. So he spent the next year working to fix those problems with his team. They moved forward. And by the next review, Tom proudly reported that they were one of the top suppliers to the automobile industry. So hopefully in my storytelling, you could see that Tom perceived the emotions, he perceived his own, he perceived his team's emotions. He was understanding that, this was a dire situation. I mean, this was a really critical situation that he was in. But he also understood not to act on the impulse, and that in order to go forward, he'd need to help manage his own emotions and the emotions of his team. So in a nutshell, that was a really vibrant story that we thought kind of brought these elements of emotional intelligence to life. So hopefully, Carrie, did I miss any good pieces of that?
No, I think that covers it really well. Yeah. So that's a good example. I think it really illustrates how one leader in one situation used emotional intelligence to really turn around a very difficult situation. But what does the research say? I mean, is it actually a fact? Is there evidence that emotional intelligence helps leaders to be more effective? So we're going to look at some of that research now. Cornelia, you want to start it off with the Google study?
Sure. So let me scroll down to there. I'm getting caught up in my own story here. Okay. So the Google study, I think Carrie and I thought to highlight this because it really highlights one of the major reasons when leadership goes awry, people leave, employees leave. So companies are faced with retention problems. And anyway, Google was finding that some of their good employees were leaving, and they wanted to understand why. So they started a research, sort of a research group, and I think it was called Project Oxygen. That's what they named it, which I thought was interesting. And what they found was one of the most important reasons was, a boss that lacked emotional intelligence. So they looked, and Google's very good at data analytics. So they used data analytics to analyze, I think they looked at 10,000 pieces of information, management reviews, performance evaluations, things like that. And out of that, they identified what qualities of a boss were most critical for employees to perform well and for them to stay in the company. And what they found was really interesting. You would think, right, with Google, technical and cognitive intelligence would be at the top of the list. But actually what they found was the reverse. They actually found that technical skill ranked last in 8 factors, and emotional and social intelligence ranked topped. And so that was an interesting finding in terms of a big company that we all know, we read about in the paper all the time, what they found in terms of their own information in their organization. So the employees most valued even-keeled bosses who made time one-on-one for them, who helped them problem solve, and who took an active interest in their careers and life. So, Carrie, do you want to take it from here in terms of the other research?
Yeah, thanks, Cornelia. So Google's study is interesting, provides some evidence, but as Cornelia just said, that's one company, one type of organization, one industry. What about more generally? Well, fortunately, a team of organizational psychologists a few years ago looked at all the research that had been done and published and was available on the relationship between the effectiveness of leaders and or the emotional intelligence of leaders and the performance of the people that they were supervising and leading. And they used a technique, a statistical technique called meta-analysis, which allowed them to pool statistically the findings from all these different studies. They ultimately found 12 studies involving over 2,700 leaders. And when they pooled the results, they found that the emotional intelligence of the leader accounted for 23% of the variation in employee work performance. Now, some of you may look at that and think, well, that's not such a big deal, 23%. I mean, that's not even, 1/4 the variation. But when you think about it, Cornelia, you want to move that little thing that popped up there? When you think about it, 23% is really kind of a big deal, because think about all the different factors that go into an employee's work performance, not the least of which is the employee's skill, the employee's motivation, experience, relationships with other workers. And so when you see that leaders' emotional intelligence accounts for over 1/5 of the variation, that is pretty impressive. And they went on and they found that a leader's emotional intelligence is also strongly associated with the job satisfaction of their employees, and also how willing the employees are to go the extra mile to help the organization to succeed. So we could, spend the rest of our presentation sharing some of this research with you, but hopefully this is compelling enough to have you recognize that emotional intelligence, leaders' emotional intelligence particularly, can be a very important factor, not just in making people feel good, but actually in helping people to reach their potential and be most effective. Okay, so now Cornelia is going to talk a little bit about our study, and we're going to focus the rest of the time on our study. Let me just kind of provide the context. As I said, we've had a lot of research now that has looked at the relationship between a leader's emotional intelligence and leadership effectiveness. and the evidence continues to mount. Every month, more studies emerge. And the next question, it seemed to us, was how are these emotionally intelligent leaders who are so effective actually using their emotional intelligence to deal with critical challenges and opportunities? And the story we started with, Tom, is actually one of the incidents that came from that study, which showed how a particular leader used emotional intelligence. So Cornelia, can you give us a little, some more details about the study itself?
Sure. So as you said, Tom was one of the incidents. We collected over 126 incidents where leaders spoke about how they used and managed emotions. But that came from a sample. So we were able to study 25 mid and senior level organizational leaders. And the split in terms of gender is we had 12 men and 13 women represented. We conducted what we call a critical event interview, excuse me, which is it can be a fairly in-depth, it is a fairly in-depth interview where we basically ask the leaders, describe to us two incidents in which you had to, that involved emotion and that involved the management of emotion. And so, and we would use probing questions to understand more about the incident. What was happening? What were you doing? What was your response? So by the end of the interview, we had a fairly good picture of what these events looked like and what they felt like. In terms of organizations, we ran the gamut. These leaders came from many different areas. We had large corporations, medium-sized firms, family businesses, nonprofit, social services, state social services, and school systems and community service programs. So these are leaders across a wide sector of fields. And they were also, in terms of how we got access to these leaders, we asked for nominations by management consultants, coaches, and leaders in other industries to nominate leaders they felt use their emotional intelligence. Because again, we were interested to see how it gets used so that's kind of, and out of that, after we did all the analysis, we were able to boil down the data into these 9 strategies that these leaders found, 9 strategies to use their emotional intelligence. So that's kind of in a nutshell our study. And so here on the next page here are the 9 strategies. So I guess what I'll do is I'm just going to move. I have a little bubble here over my screen here. So the first strategy we found was that leaders monitored the emotional climate. And this often happened in the settings of meetings. So leaders would, look around to see what was going on. And as what Michael was talking, the nonverbals, lots of nonverbal monitoring by leaders. Strategy 2, we had express your feelings to motivate others. Leaders would express their feelings to get people, to influence people, to get them to help achieve a goal. And we have another, consider how your own behavior influences other emotions. Just as an FYI, I've starred, we're actually going to talk to you about if we can get through 4 of the strategies today. And we're going to have some activities and some chat box opportunities when we get to them. So I don't know, I guess I'll just read off the others, but just so you know that they're here. We have leaders often put themselves in others' shoes to better understand. They were able to decipher the underlying emotional dynamics of a situation using their emotions. They reframed how they thought about a situation to mostly regulate their emotion. They created optimal interpersonal boundaries, and they sought out help in managing their emotions when maybe things became a little overwhelming. And lastly, but not least, they helped others develop and use their emotional abilities. So those were the 9 strategies that we were able to glean from our research. So I guess we can jump into the strategy, although this isn't how the order, I just put strategy 1 there because this is the first strategy we're talking about here, but it's about how leaders reframe how they thought about a situation and how important that was in regulating their emotion. So Carrie, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. So as we said in the beginning, emotional intelligence involves perceiving accurately, understanding, and managing one's emotions. And probably it's the last one, managing emotions, that is ultimately the most important and certainly the most visible. And when we looked at these strategies that the leaders were using, there were 3 of them that were particularly important for managing emotions. And the most important one, the one that was used most often by most leaders, had to do with changing the way in which they would think about a situation. So let's go back to the story about Tom that we started with and look at how he used this strategy. When we interviewed him and he described, what happened, we were really kind of blown away. I mean, how do you cope with your own feelings and emotions in that situation as the person most responsible? So we asked him that. How did you cope with that? And this is what he said. He said, first of all, I realized and I told myself that the world is complicated and messy, and there are always going to be problems to be dealt with. And that helped me to kind of calm down and recognize, well, all right, I should have expected that things weren't going to be great. And they aren't, but this is the way life is. Second thing that he told himself, which helped him to manage his emotions, was, as a leader, I'll usually get the most challenging problems, the ones others can't solve. So this is the way it's going to be from now on if I'm going to be the general manager of this plant. All the problems are going to be big ones because, I'm the one at the top. And the last thing he said was, it's usually overly simplistic to blame just one person or group. As Cornelia pointed out, his initial response was that his leadership team, the people in his leadership team who had been really responsible for this mess that he found himself in, his temptation was to just really focus the blame on them and Monday morning get rid of them all. But he reminded himself that it's usually overly simplistic to do that. There were a couple of other things he did. Well, really, one more thing that he did that was really important and impressive. And that was, once he began to calm down by reframing the situation, changing his perspective in the way that I just described, he did something that we called adopt an inquiring mind. He really focused for the rest of the meeting on trying to understand what the people from their company that they were supplying, really understand by listening to them carefully what the problems were. You know, what can we start to do to turn this situation around? And so he began to ask questions and really, you know, stopped worrying about what the consequences might be. And the more he asked questions, the more he got engaged in just, you know, trying to understand this problem. Remember, he was an engineer, so this was something that was really ingrained in him. All right, you know, let's look at the problem, analyze it, and go with that. It became easier and easier for him to manage his own emotion. And again, don't play the blame game was very important in reframing it.
Okay, so we have a chat box question to lead us into the next strategy. So we thought we'd ask you all, and for those of you who are new to the Zoom platform, there is a chat box. There should be a little chat button at the bottom of your screen. And if you click on the word chat, it'll take you in there, and you can type in the little text box, you know, your answer to this. But the question that we'd like to pose to you are, what are one or two ways in which being stressed out affects the way you interact with others? So let's take a minute and we'll wait for you guys to chat away. Let's see, what are one or two ways in which being stressed out affects the way you interact with others? So, sorry there. All right, so let's see. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to look for my chat box myself. And Carrie, if you see anything there, oh, did it again. Okay, here we go. I'd like to look at the chat box myself. Shannon says, being less patient affects her ability to, be impatient, I thought I saw, and to listen, causes them to become impatient, distracted, difficult to control emotions, not focused. Wow, very similar themes. Makes you want to answer before thinking about your response. Good. You guys are very articulate about your emotions. Short-tempered, shorter in response. So we see a theme here. Would you say, Carrie, this mimics the research exactly on what they found about leaders who are undergoing stress?
Absolutely, yeah. Why don't you go to the next slide, Cornelia, and show people what the research actually shows. It does mirror a lot of what they were saying.
Okay, so the ways in which stress can affect a leader's behavior. So you guys might see some of yourself in this. Leaders become more insensitive. They pay less attention to relationships. They're less responsive to others' needs, right? Because when you're stressed, you're only thinking about what you're stressed about. Less patient, we heard that several times. Less diplomatic, and less attuned to the cultural messages around you. So you can imagine, I know we have some international students joining us today. And I was thinking about, you know, when you're abroad or you're working in a culture that isn't your own or where you grew up, imagine how debilitating stress might be, and being able to pick up some of those cultural cues. So less aware of our own behaviors, feelings, and impulses. More likely, I have more difficulty managing our own emotions. We feel like we want to lash out, not give things a lot of thought, right? And that doesn't adequately think through possible causes and consequences when making decisions. Become more rigid, less open, and creative. So I would say those are not very good things for emotional intelligence. Would you agree, Carrie?
Well, they do show what happens when leaders do, experience stress. And I think it really, I mean, it happens to all of us.
Right.
Ultimately, I mean, we try to minimize stress as much as we can, but ultimately, I think the challenge and where emotional intelligence is important is in managing the stress so that we don't react as much in these ways that can be really counterproductive. And one way of doing that is to consider how your own behavior influences others' emotions. And it looks like many of you are already able to do that. In the chat box, really, many of you identified really well, I think, how stress might affect your behavior and then affect the emotions of other people. And that was the second strategy that we wanted to talk more about today. Because a lot of the leaders that we studied, the outstanding leaders who were seen as so emotionally intelligent, were very good at doing this and did this quite a lot, considered how their own behavior influenced others' emotions. And I think one of the best examples of that was one of the leaders who was a very high level executive in a large company. And one of the groups that was in his area was currently going through some very important regulatory oversight. And they had to do a lot of work to prepare for this and to have the regulators give them a clean bill of health so that they could continue to function. And as the process started, the leader of that group kind of disappeared. I mean, he was dealing with very serious personal and health issues, and he just, one day, he didn't show up. So the leader, the senior executive, who was one of the outstanding leaders in our group, and who was telling us about this story in the interview, realized that he had to step in and help the group to deal with a situation that was already very stressful, but now it was even more stressful. And so what he did, and I think as with many of these strategies, it wasn't even something he was fully conscious of. It was almost an automatic kind of emotionally intelligent response. He thought about how his own behavior could influence the emotions of the people in that group. And he realized two things. First of all, that it was very important that he provide them with support, that he showed them that he appreciated how difficult the situation was for them, and that he be as available as possible to help them get through it. And also that he would, hopefully be calm as he was doing all this. The second thing he did, which has to do with a symbolic action that can be very powerful, was he moved his office from the central location. This group was in a satellite site. He actually moved his office for the next 4 weeks or so that he would be right on the site of the group that was going through this very challenging situation. And he met with them and he said, all right, I know this is a very difficult situation, but we're going to get through it, and I'm going to be here every day for most of the day. If you have a problem, my door is always going to be open, and we'll get through it. And that had a huge impact on helping that group to do the work that they needed to do to pass the the review with flying colors. And while was also, I think, a really good example of how a leader considered how his own behavior influenced others' emotions and then used that to help others manage those emotions. Okay, Cornelia, I think you're going to lead us in an activity or share with us an activity that has to do with the strategy.
Right. So I call this, so one of the features in the book, at the end of each of these strategies, which are each strategy is a chapter, is an activity. And the idea behind bringing the activity was that people could get a sense of practicing the strategy, because the thought is if you have an opportunity to practice, it's more likely that you'll be able to transfer it, into a time and a place for when you might need it. So one of the activities we have under observing the impact, others' impact. Oops, I hear my phone here. I'm going to turn this off. Is I call this like an inside out activity, meaning while we want to understand our impact on others, we first have to understand the impact others have had on us, right? So if we can recognize that as an experience that we've had, it's more likely that we'll be able to then turn it outwards and be able to see the kind of impact we have on others. So anyway, it's an activity there. It's a series of questions, and I don't know if we're going to have a lot of time to actually do this here, but we wanted to show you or give you a taste of the activities in the book. And maybe at some point in time, you can actually stream back to this webinar and do it during a time when you have a few minutes. But again, it's taking those moments to actually think through some of these things that those aha moments might occur. So anyway, think of a time, so this activity is a time when you experienced a person's positive influence during an interaction, right? What did they say or do that allowed you to receive it as a positive impact? What impact did it have on you, on others around you? And how did you respond? And what other factors may have influenced the situation? So I actually wrote up some of these activities, and I can remember a time when I was a new mother going through, it was just finishing up my doctoral program. And my husband, of course, worked during the day, and I had signed up for a yoga class at night because I was stressed out. So anyway, I signed up for, it was a meditation class. And I was late. My husband was late getting home from work. I'm like boiling. I'm driving over there like, oh, I'm going to make such a scene. I don't want to get yelled at, the whole thing. And I walked in very quietly and meekly. And the instructor said to me, please join us. I set aside a seat for you. I can see you, I want you to relax, go over to your seat. And I was so relieved. I was so relieved by her inviting me in that kind of way. So anyway, you can read more about it in the book, but that's like a positive, and it wasn't like a big dramatic kind of event. It was kind of like a small incident, but boy, obviously it left a lasting impact on me. So I think back to that time when I see if others are stressed and how I might help alleviate some of that for someone else. So anyway, that's an activity in the book. We just wanted to highlight that. Hopefully you'll have maybe a chance in your class to go back to something like this. So onward and upward. I guess we're on to strategy 3. So
yeah, that was a terrific example, Cornelia. Thanks for sharing that with us. So strategy 3 is seek out others for help in managing emotions. Now, it turns out that for both Cornelia and me, this was the strategy that we found most surprising. Why? Because these leaders were identified as not only outstanding, but also particularly effective in managing their emotions and the emotions of other people. And so we were really surprised that given that, they would ever need to seek out help from others in managing their emotion. But it turned out that a lot of the leaders in many of these situations really felt that, they needed help from other people in order to really deal with the emotional dynamics as effectively as they wanted to. Let me share you one of our favorite examples of this. This was a guy who is the CEO of a wholesale beverage company. So what he would do typically is at least once a year, he'd go around and meet with his largest customers and renegotiate the agreements for the coming year. And he would usually look forward to these meetings and, he enjoyed touching base with his customers. He had been working with many of them for many years. But there was always one customer that he really dreaded meeting with, because every year, no matter how well prepared he thought he was, he would sit down with this guy, and this guy would just begin to, hit every one of the leader's buttons. I mean, he really knew how to get under this guy's skin, so that by the time the meeting was over, the head of the wholesale beverage company had ended up, with an agreement that was really much less favorable than he had hoped for. So he was getting ready for his next meeting with this customer, and he decided to talk with this other executive, an older guy who had a lot of experience. They had known each other for many years socially, and the leader in our study, we'll call him Charles. Charles had really come to rely on him as a kind of mentor and coach. So he shared with this older executive the problem, and the executive thought about it a minute, and he said, well, why do you have to be the one to meet with this customer? Why don't you get one of your other executives to do it? And Charles thought, that's a pretty good idea. He realized that his sales manager was, very competent and very capable of doing the meeting. And so they did that. And the sales manager came back, showed Charles the agreement, and it was by far the best agreement they ever had with this particular company. So it's a really good example, I think, of this third strategy, which, not only can outstanding leaders use this and do use this, but I think it's something that we can all use and should use whenever we're dealing with a situation that's emotionally fraught. And by the way, this example also illustrates another one of our strategies, which was also somewhat surprising, and that is that leaders don't need to just use their own internal thought processes. You remember the first strategy we talked about was reframing the way you think about the situation in order to kind of get control of your emotions, and in order to, deal with stressful situations more effectively. And that was a strategy that was probably used most often. But a lot of these leaders also used a more preventive approach by changing the situation so that they wouldn't even get into these situations that were so stressful that they would have to, use these reframes to help themselves. And very often the way they changed the situation was by modifying the interpersonal boundary between them and other people. And that is what Charles did here. He was used to meeting directly and very personally one-on-one with all of his important customers. And that worked fine in most cases. But with this particular customer, what he ultimately needed to do was to create a more rigid kind of interpersonal boundary between him and the customer, and to really have a go-between to do the actual work of negotiating a contract. And lo and behold, it worked. So that really is another way of managing emotions that many of these leaders use, another strategy, and something that I think we can all learn from.
Yeah, I would just say, Carrie, the other sort of theme around seeking out others for help, particularly I remember in the data, people who were in maybe larger corporations where the political environment was a little intense, but the importance of finding somebody that they could really trust when they sought help. So for some people, that meant that they had to go outside the organization to seek out the help that they needed and the counsel, because just to do it internally with, people that may have been down the hall would have felt, it would have made them feel too vulnerable. And maybe the trust factor wasn't as high. So I just wanted to point that out, that the importance of finding that sort of involved a level of emotional intelligence, which was identifying the right person, for getting the help that they needed.
Yeah, good point.
So, okay. So speaking of help, we wanted to ask you, what are some of these? So this is a chat box opportunity again. We want to ask, what are some of the barriers that prevent you from asking for help? And actually, since I'd actually like to ask a variation of that question to our international students, what are some of the barriers that prevent you from asking for help by being abroad? So feel free to chat in the box. I'm going to go down. I'm going to go look at the box now. See if we see anything. Okay. Rejection. Don't want to seem like I can't handle a task. Fear of judgment, pride, and ego. Yeah. Leadership style, the boss does not allow for it, right? Yeah, it's scary to ask for help sometimes. You're never quite sure, and that's why it's important to identify a person that you trust or that you think would be open. Fears that other will think I'm stupid. Yeah. Any comments from Carrie from what you're seeing around the themes?
Yeah, I mean, with this one, there are two themes that really emerged very clearly. The first one is, fear that others will think I'm stupid. That several other comments, same thing. We don't want to appear vulnerable, stupid, like we can't control things, we can't manage things. And I think that's right. I think that's often a big barrier. The other one that I noticed is not wanting to impose on other people. I don't want to be an imposition. I don't want to take up this person's time. It shouldn't be all about me. And I think probably most of us can resonate to both of those barriers.
Absolutely, right. Very normal. And I guess the realistic part, the part of me that knows there are sometimes leaders that it's hard. It isn't a good thing to ask for help. So it's good that, you know, if you sort of ascertain that person's not going to be helpful, that's probably a pretty good gut instinct. But the idea is to seek help elsewhere. So
Yeah.
All right. So here's our
And
next. Oh, go ahead.
One other thing, Cornelia, I think this actually goes back also to an earlier strategy, which is recognizing how our behavior affects the emotions of others. And we need to use our emotional intelligence and that particular strategy to avoid, sharing some of our difficulties with people who are not going to use that information, to our benefit. That requires emotional intelligence. And also recognizing, I know what I often do when I ask for help for others, I do worry about imposing for others. And so I try to, look for any indication as I'm doing this, that it might be, maybe not the best time, they're busy with other things, they don't want to get into this. And I try to pick up these nonverbal cues. And, if I feel that, this isn't the right time or place, then I'll, back off. So this, as you said, this is another example, I think, where we all need to, and probably most of us do use our emotional intelligence to avoid being an imposition on other people.
Well, you sort of highlighted our next question, which is a follow-up to this question. And I was thinking, I must have a similar trait that you have, which is I often don't want to impose either. And so what I tend to do is, which has been helpful, is give people an out. If it is not a good time or they're too busy, then I always allow them to be able to say no to something. And that it wouldn't be a big deal. So, so that brings us to our next question, which is, what step could you take to move past or to move around, right? We try and negotiate our lives. Sometimes we can't go right through, we have to go around. But what would you do? What step could you take to move past that barrier? So I'd be interested to see in the chat box what kind of ideas you might have around that. I can't pull up my chat. Oh, there it is. Okay, here we go. Yes, and I guess I just saw Angela's prompt about taking questions. And we're going to wrap it up in the next slide, so that I think it's nice to hear, I would like to hear from some of you, some of the questions you have, because I don't know about you, Carrie, but I feel like I've been speaking the whole time, which is what a webinar sort of is, but I'm so much more interested to hear what other people have to ask or have to say. So
yeah, we'll wrap it up soon, but I'm curious to see what thoughts our participants have about how to move past some of these barriers.
Yeah. Oh, challenging beliefs around feeling vulnerable, right? Digging a little deeper.
Oh, these are great.
Yeah. Asking questions more frequently to get used to it and lose the fear.
Isn't that a great idea? Yeah.
Show a better way of responding to the same situation. So leading by example. Yeah. Get beyond the fear. Practice, right? Practice courage. You can ask for once and you could see how it goes, right? You could experiment and set up an open dialogue. I mean, I'm sure it's funny with all the different ways that we communicate. Maybe there's a really interesting idea out there about how to do that. Vincent, you are why not? Why not ask?
Yeah.
Good question. Okay. Well, good, you guys. Thanks for responding to that. And so we'll move, I guess we'll wrap it up here. So final thoughts around the leading with feeling. So Carrie, I forget, am I supposed to do the screen or are you doing this?
Well, I'll take it. I don't think you've been talking too much, Cornelia. I love to hear you talk, but I'll do this part, give you a little bit of a rest. So these are just a few final thoughts or takeaways before we open it up for the Q&A. First of all, probably most important, is your beliefs about emotions and feelings really do make a critical difference. Second of all, if you do start working on using some of these strategies, and we hope that many of you will, don't expect that it's going to go smoothly all the time from the very beginning. Be prepared to make mistakes, and don't get discouraged when you do. Learn and move on. And in fact, one of the comments that someone wrote in the last chat was basically the same idea. And then finally, if you do start using these strategies and they don't, magically work initially, keep in mind that you often have to use these strategies repeatedly for them to have a meaningful impact. But the more you do it, the more practice you have, the more you read about them in the book or start observing how other people might be using them and using them as models. I think the more you'll be able to leverage your emotional intelligence to be not just effective leaders, but happy, satisfied, healthy people who contribute a lot to their community. So with that, let me turn it back to Angela, I think, who's going to lead us into the Q&A.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Nell. I could listen to you all day.
Oh, thank you.
It's a great
I
presentation.
don't know if I can.
So far, so good. I want to say that there are a great number of students in the audience today, and some of them happen to be mine from the public relations class that I teach. And I want to thank all the students and colleagues who are here today, and members of the educational community, the business community. One of our students, Marin Dotloff, is asking, can anyone be an emotionally intelligent leader?
Well, let me put it this way, get off the hook a little bit. I think anyone can be a more emotionally intelligent leader. In fact, I think the first question is really impossible to answer, because it's not like, we're either emotionally intelligent or we aren't. It's a continuum, just like cognitive intelligence. And I think that unlike cognitive intelligence, emotional intelligence really can be learned and developed, and we can also improve. And in fact, the research suggests that people just naturally become more emotionally intelligent as they get older, at least up to a certain point. And that is not the case with IQ or cognitive intelligence. So yes, I think anyone can become more emotionally intelligent, but it takes work. You really need to be motivated. You need to feel that it's really something that's worth your time and effort, because it is going to take a certain amount of time and effort.
And another question here is from Ann Kristen Durkin. How can a company convince a leader of emotional intelligence who has been very resistant to it so far?
Yeah, that can have a big impact, right? If leaders at the very top of the organization don't buy into emotional intelligence or don't lead through emotional intelligence, and we do talk about that in the book, that is a major barrier to being able to express your own emotional intelligence. And I remember, I think the piece of advice that we talk about is, sometimes knowing if you have an organization or a leader who doesn't kind of, think about things the same way you do, is to learn more, but also find influence through different channels. Do you remember that part of the chapter, Carrie, where you sort of work within the organization? It doesn't mean you necessarily have to go over the person's head, but
Right.
but it was a way of being able to have influence without necessarily overturning your leader.
Yeah. We also have one of the incidents that we highlight is we call it the Manny story.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. This was actually a situation in which the CEO of a large company asked one of his senior executives to work with another senior executive named Manny, who was really very smart, had really good technical skills, met all his goals in terms of performance, but had really abominable social and emotional intelligence. And the CEO asked this other senior executive to work with Manny to help him to become more emotionally intelligent, which was really challenging because it wasn't Manny who was asking for this kind of help. In the book, we describe the challenges that this executive faced in trying to work with Manny. And at the beginning, it did not go very well, but ultimately, it really came around. And the story shows how this very emotionally intelligent executive used his emotional intelligence, not the least of which was really persisting and not taking it too personally when Manny would almost literally throw him out of his office in the early stages.
Gave him the middle finger, if I remember.
What was that, Cornelia?
He gave him the middle finger when the emotionally intelligent executive was trying to coach him.
Yes. So I think that's that would be a good example to look at in terms of what an individual who is not the person's boss might do to help another individual at the same level in the organization to, be a little bit more emotionally intelligent.
So on that note, we have a question here about how do you gain the respect of employees and at the same time build an emotional relationship?
I kind of feel like the two go hand in hand,
Yeah.
right? Because as you're utilizing your emotional intelligence, you're building trust. And as you build trust, that doesn't mean you won't disagree with the other employee, but it makes it easier to disagree and to work through that, work through both the ups and the downs. So to me, it's hand in hand how that works.
So
I think one misconception about emotional intelligence is that it's being nice to other people. And that, that's certainly, part of it very often, but it's really knowing when to be nice, when to provide support, compassion, but also knowing when to set limits and, remind people what their responsibilities are and to, make sure that they fulfill those responsibilities. And even, expressing anger sometimes. I think that's, anger, when it's done when it's expressed in an emotionally intelligent way, it is necessary and useful sometimes. So I think that may address what the person who asked that question was concerned about.
a few people are asking if you can make a copy of the presentation available following the event.
Of course.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. What we'll do is we can email the PowerPoint presentation following the event to the guest list here today and to anyone who's asked for it. Thank you for
Great.
being so generous with that. I have so many more questions here. One specific question that someone is curious about is, did you intend to publish this book during a pandemic? It just came out this summer, correct? And
Correct.
was
Yes.
that intentional? That's the question.
Yeah. Well,
No, in fact, the book was supposed to come out a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we all have these pandemic stories. Our pandemic story is that the book was supposed to come out in May or something. And we get this notice at some point back in March, I guess it was, that there would be a delay because all of the publishers' books were, I guess, printed in this one plant in North Carolina. And that plant had to close down for several weeks because several of the workers had become infected by COVID. So it was very much connected with the pandemic, but not in any way that we had intended.
right.
And this has been mentioned today, the idea of exercising emotional intelligence when you're working remotely. So how do you manage that emotional intelligence during a pandemic when many people are working from home?
Right. I think we wrote this. And Angela, I think I sent you the link, which you're more than welcome to share. We were talking about leadership during the pandemic. So, and remotely. So I'm thinking a lot of you might be doing Zoom calls or, emails and correspondence, chats, those, FaceTiming in terms of working remotely. I've worked with companies that are now working on, like in a hybrid model where some are on site and some are on Zoom, coming into a conference call, which has been, I'm not going to lie, I think it's a real challenge right now. And I'm not sure I have all the answers, but the biggest lesson that I'm taking away from seeing leaders operate in this context is patience. Because so much has gotten disrupted that for them to get too caught up in trying to, they still have deadlines and customers who are expecting their products, but patience with people's schedules and employees it's just been tough. But that's the theme I'm seeing right now, is this level of patience, and the world is messy. That reframing has absolutely kicked in for people who are trying to effectively manage this. But having led some Zoom calls myself, it is still possible to check in with people. So I've noticed people who might be late coming into a Zoom appointment, or I've had a person break down on a Zoom appointment, showing emotions. So it isn't void of, nonverbal cues. The idea, though, I think to keep in mind is to follow up when you have a radar up. So I will often circle back and check things out with that person. So little tips, but I'm sure I feel like if anyone wants to do this research, this would be a really interesting time to look into that.
Yeah.
So follow up and take time to spend time with people one-on-one and to check in. Those are really excellent tips. I have a student here who's making a statement that so few leaders have emotional intelligence or exercise emotionally based leadership. Do you agree with this? And do you believe that there will be more emotionally intelligent leaders in the future? And the third part of this question is, who is the most prominent example of an emotionally based leader today?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll start it, and hopefully Cornelia can jump in and add some things. I think maybe I'm being too optimistic about this, but I think a lot of our leaders are, let's say, emotionally intelligent enough, but either they're working in a situation that doesn't allow them to use their emotional intelligence. I mean, I think the culture of the work setting is important. And there are some work settings that are not very EI friendly, as we refer to it. And so leaders who might be very emotionally intelligent in the way they do things feel like they're just not really allowed to do that, and they don't. And I think the other part is that sometimes leaders don't know how to use their emotional intelligence. And that's one of the reasons we wrote this book. These strategies provide a very concrete way for people who already have enough emotional intelligence to use it in difficult situations when, without having a concrete strategy, it might be more difficult. So, I think that addresses at least some. I didn't answer the question about, who is the most emotionally intelligent, an example of the most emotionally intelligent person, but maybe Cornelia, you had a little bit more time to think of that. Did you come up with any ideas?
I've met many interesting, no, truly, and I really mean this. I can't decide. I've met, everybody's been unique in their own way. And they bring something a little bit different, a little different mixture that I honestly couldn't say, do I have a favorite leader out there? I certainly know the qualities that I would like in a leader. And they probably very much mimic some of the leaders that we talk about in the book. But to say I have one favorite leader, I don't think I can answer that.
Well, I would have to say Michael Smith, president of Berkeley
Oh,
Oh,
good answer.
College. But
Why, Angela?
what I wanted to, there's another question in here. On that note, somebody in the chat box wrote Pope Francis. I just want to say that we have somebody here.
that's a good one. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The other question here is, the ability to recognize, understand, and influence the feelings of others, can this also be used to manipulate others?
Mm. It can. Yep. And in that sense, emotional intelligence is very similar to any other kind of intelligence. It can be used, and it points to the importance of values. What are a person's values? Because leaders can use many of these emotional intelligence abilities to manipulate people to further their own goals at the expense of the organization. And so a person's personal values are really very important. And that's a little bit different from emotional intelligence. Having said that, I think it's important to keep in mind that emotional intelligence involves the ability to perceive, understand, and manage our emotions. And that includes having empathy for others, having compassion for others, being able to work effectively on a team, and being able to manage our own emotions so that they don't, they help us to be successful, but they also help other people to be successful. So it's not just, manipulating others on an emotional level. That by itself is just one part of emotional intelligence.
While today's focus has been on leadership and emotional intelligence, how does emotional intelligence translate to everyday employees?
Makes me think of, I remember taking a class, and it's just leaders. We talk a lot about leaders, and I was thinking followers are just as important, right, as the leaders, because without followers, there's nothing to lead. So when I think about myself as an employee, I often think about myself in that context. And so anyway, I was just thinking, what was the question exactly, Angela? What was about, how does it apply for everyday sort of employees?
Yes, it says, the question is, would you say that emotional intelligence and emotionally intelligent responses are linked to employees? And how effective can employees also implement emotional intelligence in their work?
Yeah, I think we could go through the 9 strategies and in almost every case, change leader to employee, and, it would make sense. I mean, just, we talked about changing the way, when you're starting to feel overwhelmed by a situation because of stress or anger or frustration, falling back on those ways in which the people in our study reframed the situation. Don't play the blame game, focus on the task, don't worry about all these other things. That can be very, very helpful for anyone. Similarly, seeking out the help of others when dealing with an emotionally challenging situation and being aware of how your behavior might be affecting the way other people are feeling. So I think all those strategies work for anyone, and in fact can even go beyond the workplace and into the family and our personal lives.
Well, I was thinking, just as a side note, you may not have a formal title that indicates leader, but in many venues of your life, you may be a leader in a family, leader in a community, leader, at some point you'll probably be asked to be a leader. As I got older, people are asking me to do this. And so to think too, there are other spheres in which you may take up a leadership role that you may not even be conscious that you're doing. So, or have chosen. So, the opportunities will await you.
And we're about to wrap up today's event. Cornelia and Carrie, thank you so much for being with us. Before we leave,
You're welcome.
One more message that you want to leave our audience with today about the importance of emotional intelligence in leadership.
I'm not good. Make it matter. If you don't see it around you, make it matter. Make it matter for yourself. I do believe in the ripple effect, and it doesn't just have to come from the top down. It can come from the bottom up. That would be my advice.
Yeah, that's good. I second that.
Great. And I third the emotion that this has been a great event. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time, Carrie Chernus and Cornelia Roach. It's been a gift having you here today and sharing your Leading with Change strategies. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela. Thanks so much. And thanks to your team who really helped behind the scenes for this to happen, and Michael for such a nice introduction and making us feel warm and welcomed.
It's been a pleasure having you. Thanks everyone for being with us. Following today's event, we'll be sharing links to the presentation that Carrie and Cornelia shared this morning, as well as a link to how you can purchase the book on Amazon. Thanks so much everyone for being with us. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.